Hello, I'm here to talk about week 4 of HSP 2000. And this week we are talking about cognitive theory and how we process information. We all process information quite a bit the same way. However, we do that at different rates of speed sometimes than other people. We have individual variances, but overall, the process of encoding and storing information is the same. It's just sometimes how we do it and the process we go about doing it can be slightly different per each individual. And we talk about environment this week and how social learning impacts how we learn and what we learn. Unfortunately, sometimes what we learn from others is not always the best, including what we learn from society and our culture in general. And I want you to think about modeling the people that have been positive role models in your life. Some of those folks that have modeled for you may not always have been positive role models. Sometimes they're negative role models. But just the same, we are learning from the people around us. I want you to also consider what kind of role model are you to younger generations, even to colleagues, classmates, neighbors, all the people that we engage. We are communicating something to them, and they are learning from us vicariously, even if they don't really know that they are. So let's think about the imprint that we make on other people. And that leads us into moral reasoning. This has all these things that we talk about have a faith component to them, but I really like to narrow that down with moral reasoning. In the Bible, it talks about the age of accountability. And it does not really give us a specific age in the Bible, because just like we talked about a moment ago, we know that we process information at different rates. Some of us process things faster, some of us a little bit slower. We may take more time just to digest information, and that's okay. Our maturity level is much the same when we talk about moral reasoning. We all are at different stages of moral development, even as adults. And as we're into later childhood, early adolescence, those variables are probably a bit wider as far as where you're at with the moral reasoning and the age of accountability. I always tend, in my mind, to think about it as like age 12, 13. I feel like by that point, most individuals do know what's right from wrong and should be held responsible for that. However, the Bible doesn't really give us that age. We know that there might be somebody that has a learning disability or somehow mentally challenged through maybe a birth defect or something like that. Their process of moral reasoning may look much different than somebody at the same age. And even adults, you're going to have a variation of what moral reasoning looks like. And some people may never reach a real high level of moral reasoning. And that can be due to various factors. The other topic I want to talk about is emotion. God gave us emotion, and it's a beautiful thing. Unfortunately, in our sin nature, it can also be a bad thing. And I just want us to think about how our emotions rule us, because sometimes they do, even me. Sometimes our emotions just get the best of us, and we lose perspective of what's really important because of how we feel. Many scripture talk into this concept of managing our emotions. God gave them to us for a reason, so we can love one another, so we can empathize with each other and support each other in Christian love. But sometimes our emotions also have some negative impacts on our lives as well. So thinking about managing our emotions. And that leads us into something else, which is stress, which was a topic in week 4. How do we manage stress? Sometimes I manage it very well, and sometimes I don't, and I'm sure you're probably the same. We probably have a few triggers, certain things that may trigger our stress level, and that's different with every individual. All the topics that we're talking about today are very individualized. We have many commonalities among each other, but we also have some very unique differences. And with stress management, what may be a trigger for me and putting my stress level over the top may not be your trigger. You may have a very different trigger. So learning how to manage stress, the Bible talks about that as well. And many scripture fall into managing our stress. And then he talks about how, if God can take care of the birds and things like that, how he can take care of our needs. And sometimes we just have to lay our burdens at the cross and realize that the Lord's going to take care of our needs. The end result may not always be what we want it to be. And we may not even quite understand why things turned out the way they do. But that's not really always for us to know. And that's very difficult. It's very difficult for me, and I'm sure it is for you. But we have to know that the Lord sees things from a different vantage point than we do with our earthly perspective and our very limited perspective. This leads into abnormal coping sometimes, things like substance abuse. We hear things about people cutting themselves nowadays, suicide attempts. There's many abnormal coping mechanisms that sometimes take over due to our stress level and our emotions getting the best of us. And as you work with clients, you're going to probably meet people who have very specific issues or problems, and you're going to be the person that's there to help them. So keeping in mind how balance is also important, and that how every person is different, and looking at each client that you have with an individual perspective is extremely important, because you're treating that person, not everybody else, or generalizing that person's issues and uniqueness is very dangerous, because you're probably not going to have a very positive outcome for that client if we generalize. We need to look at that person, what their needs are, who their role models have been, how they process information. And that includes, managing emotions and stress, and looking at abnormal coping mechanisms, which many of your clients probably will have some abnormal coping mechanisms. And that's probably why they're in some type of service plan, like case management or something of that nature. So to sum up week 4, let's talk about the paper. Paper sometimes is difficult for students because you're analyzing a peer-reviewed article. This article has been published, and I just want to say that every research study has a weakness or limitation, usually multiple weaknesses or limitations, because let's face it, research studies are done by people, and we have limitations and weaknesses and faults and bias and discrimination. And sometimes we're just short-sighted on thinking, because we just talked about, the Lord sees the big picture. We don't always see that big picture. And that includes how we conduct research. So this particular article is about, healing properties and the study that was done. You're supposed to, in your paper, write about summarizing the outcomes of that study. What were the results, basically? And what were your reaction to the results? As college students, we're supposed to critically analyze peer-reviewed articles and information from our textbooks. Where to think about this information on a very deep level. So I'm wanting you to think about what's your reaction? Was this a good study? Do you feel like it helped people? And then you're going to look at the limitations of the study. Most peer-reviewed journal articles at the end are going to have limitations. And they're going to tell you what those limitations may have been. They may not even see all the limitations. Again, they're seeing this from a perspective. They've been very immersed and invested in this study, and they may not always see every limitation that there could be. So you're going to look at this from a fresh perspective and think, what were the limitations of the study? And in addition to what maybe they have said, how would you redesign this study if you were going to replicate it? And that's the last part of your paper. You're going to talk about how you would redesign the study to make it a better study, more valid and more reliable. So I hope that a brief summary of week 4 has been very helpful. Please remember, use your APA template. Cite your source in text. That means you need an in-text citation in parentheses, author's last name, publication year. If you use a direct quote, you also need to include the page number in your in-text citation. Limit direct quotes. They should not write your papers for you. You need to summarize in your own words. I want to know what you've learned, what your takeaway is from this week. So use the APA template. Make sure you have a reference page and that your source is correctly cited. The APA template gives some models or examples of how to cite information. So make sure you're always going back to the original APA template because you will have that information on there to help and guide you. Anyway, I hope you have a great week and I hope this video has been helpful. God bless.